Okay, thanks, Fiona. We started a little tiny bit late, so I'll try and move us forward fairly quickly. So that's interesting. There we go. Overview and context. So what I'm going to do is just set the scene for this demonstrator competition, which is ludicrously ambitious. So if anybody came here thinking they got kind of mildly interesting ideas, you're in the wrong place. They have to be appallingly ambitious ideas. So I'm having some problems with my clicker. There we go. So, okay, so the overall context is the government's industrial strategy. So the idea of using deliberate policy interventions to support key sectors of the UK economy. So we first started to hear some of the results of the projects funded through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, which is where a lot of the money is invested, just over a year ago. It's very important that we understand, whether you're coming from industry, whether you're coming from research, whether you're coming from kind of IP, that this is a different kind of funding from other government initiatives and other things passing through UK research and innovation. So it's about key sectors to transform, emerge and grow. It's very well focused on achieving objectives, so it's not blue sky thinking. And it's all constructed as challenges, and there's a focus on increased productivity and jobs. This is not a generic R&D fund spread across the UK economy. So in those first sets of announcements, there were significant investments in the automotive sector, particularly in the Faraday Institute, and development of new battery technologies. There were initial investments in remotely piloted vehicles for operating in dangerous environments, aka the oil and gas sector. And there was, in wave one and the current wave, there are a number of significant investments in the life sciences, in pharma, in new drug discovery, in health for aging. And so what we've got, and in many ways we're slightly in the heart of the beast in terms of those the health sciences. What you've got was investments in traditional innovation-led or research-led sectors of the economy. What there wasn't in those initial announcements was anything for the creative industries. Now, the interesting thing about the creative industries is, of course, they're bigger than all of those other sectors put together. You'll very rarely find somebody in policy-making circles who doesn't recognise the importance of the creative industries. Certainly not the case 10 years ago. But the idea that research and development and innovation funding is vital to the success of those industries in the future isn't as immediately apparent within government. So we've now moved on to have two investments from the industrial strategy around the creative industries. So in some ways, this is not just a different kind of money, but for the creative industries, it's a completely new stream of funding as well. And just to set that in context, we don't intend this to be the last of this kind of funding. So we're very, very concerned with the two investments that we make to not cock it up and deliver some real benefits. So the first investment was in wave one, was the Creative Industries Clusters Programme. So this is what's eventually going to be 8 research and development partnerships between industry and higher education across the UK in the creative sector. And that was really helped by being picked up by Peter Bazalgette as an idea in his independent review of the creative industries. So Baz said clusters were really important, and the other thing that he identified, with some help from a lot of the team who've been preparing this, is that the great technological opportunity, or technology-enabled opportunity for the creative industries, was the emergence of immersive technologies and the new content and experiences that we can all make using these technologies. But Peter did a couple of things that were really, really important in moving the argument on for us, which was to stress that the opportunity was around the experiences themselves. So the new forms of content, new narrative mechanisms that we need to develop, and that the technology alone would not be enough. So that was incredibly helpful that Baz pointed those things out, and that's flowed through into the competition that we've now got. So Audience of the Future was in the white paper on the industrial strategy back in November, so that was the first time we knew we were actually going ahead with this. It said up to 33 million asterisk and asterisk was to be confirmed. Well, we didn't get any more money, but we didn't lose any money either. So that's 33 million that we've got to spend. And as I said earlier, all of these projects are constructed as challenges. So what's the challenge that we're trying to meet? So this is the challenge statement for Audience of the Future. The objective is to capture new global audiences and grow our leading market position in creative content, products and services by adopting, exploiting and developing immersive technologies. So the construction of that is really important. So the objective is to grow new audiences by making new experiences. That's where the economic benefit is to come, and that's by utilising these technologies. So this again is fairly unprecedented in this world, significant money to what, and I can't hardly whisper it in this hall with a microphone, but what is intentionally a content innovation supported by technology. So we've got some other objectives around, we have to sign up to these when you meet the teenagers from the Treasury. They always insist that you sign up to some objectives. So we've got some really important ones. 2025, so that's what, 7 years away. We're a global market leader in the creative immersive sector. Now, I think one of our bits of understanding about this is the transition to immersive enabled experiences, content experiences, is a potentially huge opportunity for the UK, but it isn't absolutely certain that on the other side of that transition that we have the global position that we do. So that's one of the objectives, and the other is that we create 10% of global creative immersive content. So we're not only an IP generator, but we're actually a production centre, and that's true across some of our key creative sectors at the moment. Now 10% obviously would be punching above our weight on a proportionate level, but it's not unfeasible when 20% of the global box office for film was UK produced film or UK qualifying film. I'm looking at some slightly wry smiles there in the audience. These are the other challenges in this wave. So you can see the breadth of the industrial strategy, from transforming construction to quantum technology. Please fill in your appropriate quantum joke at that point, because I'm not going to. And there we are, Audience of the Future within that. Now these are also set within a kind of broad strategy of grand challenges: clean growth, healthy ageing, future mobility, and underpinning those a grand challenge around artificial intelligence and the data economy. Now, so Audience of the Future is set within that AI and data section. Obviously, it has a content focus in many ways, but I think particularly for the demonstrator that we'll be doing an event on this afternoon, the moving image demonstrator, I think there are issues where artificial intelligence and machine learning become very critical in the future of moving image. So, for those of you who I'm sure have all read the creative industries sector deal that was published a couple of months ago now, does it seem that long, 6 weeks? Audience of the Future and the Clusters Programme indeed have a prominent place. So the rationale for this programme is, as I said, that the immersive technologies, AR, VR, XR, MR, any other things that you can put in front of R, are the most potentially disruptive and significant technologies to hit the creative industries since the web 20 years ago. And I think anybody like me who's very old and was active online in the mid-90s making stuff, there actually seem very many similarities at the moment, because we've got knowledge and understanding and expertise distributed quite unevenly between industry, research, in some of our culture institutions, and we've got a bunch of companies growing who are specialising in this area, but it's not clear exactly how that will pan out. So I think it's clear that we've got an enormous amount of talent where they will have their biggest economic and creative success, I think we'll see over the next few years. So we've got opportunities and threats. The UK is at present incredibly competitive, both as an IP creator and a production centre, but that isn't absolutely certain to continue in this new medium unless we make an intervention. And that the global commercial opportunity, industrial strategy, is all about economic impact. So the commercial opportunity for the UK creative sector is through selling subscriptions and royalties and IP and bums on seats for content experiences, rather than deriving economic benefit from platforms or hardware. I'm sure that's fairly obvious to people in the audience. Right. Okay. So it's central to the creative industry sector deal. People talk about the sector deal as having £150 million in it of government funding. Well, around 50 of that is this competition. Is the Audience of the Future, not the specific competition for demonstrators. And there's a high expectation in industry that what we're trying to do here is de-risk future investment. So the demonstrators particularly are concerned with identifying and testing viable audience propositions and business models. So the important thing about that is people are telling us that they would invest more if there was a commercial model, but the thing the commercial model lacks is mass audience experiences that can point the way to building a financial model around it. So that first bullet is what we're trying to do with the demonstrators competition above all. And with other sector areas, as Tom will tell you later, we're also making interventions around production tools and ways of making production more efficient, more accessible, and in reskilling the workforce, particularly in the screen industries, to expose them to these technologies. To do this, we think everybody will need to bring industry engagement right across the value chain. So not only those specialist AR, VR, XR companies that are growing rapidly, but also everybody else to use these technologies within their practice. So content studios, IP owners, hardware providers, platform operators. We need to bring the investment community along with us, and whatever distribution is going to mean in this medium. So we've got £33 million of grant funding. 16 million of it is in the Demonstrator programme, the competition for which actually goes live today. We've got 12 million in research and development and 5 million in Industry Centre of Excellence for the screen industries. Just to unpack that a bit, the Demonstrator programme is meant to be very, very ambitious pre-commercial content innovation. So this isn't really a commercial sector, it's pre-commercial at the moment. Most of the great content experiences are being made as an ancillary product for something else, either as marketing or as an extension around a brand. What we want is new experiences that advance the state of the art and test them at scale on an audience, and we'll mention what we mean about scale in a moment. So what we're looking for with the demonstrators is very large collaborations across the supply chain that can explore future commercial models. The research and development program's got a few different bits in it. It's got an early stage design competition, which we're launching this afternoon. We've got an investment accelerator, which is about working with the private investment community to crowd in some private investment into companies, which will kick off in the autumn, and we'll be doing a fairly large-scale collaborative R&D program too. And the Industry Centre of Excellence, which some people in the room will know quite a lot about, is specifically for the screen industries, trying to tackle those new narrative and new narrative language and also experimental production, but training current talent and high-level talent operating across the screen industries to be able to use these technologies, whether they're writers or designers or directors or talent. And that's where this crosses over with the clusters program. So it's £33 million of government money, but that makes a £56 million program with all of the wonderful match funding that you're going to bring to this from industry. So that's a table of numbers, not terribly exciting, but perhaps the one thing that could excite us, if you could read the years, is that 3 years. So we've got to spend all this money very wisely in 3 years, which is why we're starting with the largest, riskiest element of that. And that's 3 financial years, one of which has already started. So this is quite a tight timescale. It's all defined by the Comprehensive Spending Review. There's going to be lots of pressure to move these projects on very quickly. The advantage of doing that is it may be that some of the big science projects move along more slowly. And of course, being the creative industries, we're always up for an opportunity if funding becomes available. So, the demonstrators. As I said, our rationale for this competition is that the future success is the innovation in content and experience and business, not in technology. That currently, AR, VR and MR lack scale. We probably all know what a 50 grand project is. Some of us know what a 250,000 pound project is, but this isn't scale. This isn't reaching audiences at scale. So what we're saying here is to move the state of the art onwards in the creative sector, we need iconic projects that can demonstrate things at scale. And only by doing that will we really push forward, unlocking the commercial models and the required investment. So altogether, we've argued this with the government that these things justify a lot of public investment in a series of pre-commercial, large, collaborative experience demonstrators. So what we're trying to do is stimulate content innovation, audience testing, gathering of insight, including commercial insight, to provide sectoral learning and unlock that investment. So that's the rationale. Obviously, people mean different things by immersive experiences, and there's immersive experiences. I mean, this is, a few years ago, this is Gravity. There are technologies, including immersive technologies, that innovate around the production of content, particularly in the screen industries. Obviously, motion capture, that's spread beyond the screen industries. This is, sorry, I was going to say, that was the obligatory Andy Serkis slide. This is the obligatory Royal Shakespeare Company, The Tempest slide, and so hi to Sarah at the back there. Obviously, this is a seminal piece of work. This is just the kind of thing everybody who has experienced the Tempest that the RSC did learnt two things. One was that these technologies can be incorporated within performance in that specific event, but also that they can be the part of a great production. This is a great production of The Tempest, which happens to have immersively generated, mocap-generated characters within it. But so this is a level of maturity. This is the state of the art we need to now move beyond. There are mixes of technologies within a live environment. I mean, I particularly love all the way that 59 Productions bring in everything, including, I would imagine, in some production I haven't seen, the kitchen sink, but they use all these to make these experiences more compelling. I warn whoever comes next that this clicker possibly lacks battery. The other thing that we're really interested in, obviously, all of the projections about the future growth of this medium say that the action for the next couple of years may be in VR, but really the ultimate prize is augmentation or mixed reality experiences. So that could be around augmenting a building or a location, or it could be around augmenting a geography or a space. And this is Street Museum, which was done several years ago now by the Museum of London, of geolocating archive photography across London. What's the next generation of augmentation? If one of these four demonstrators does not make the case for AR at scale, I think we will have failed. We're interested in sport. We're doing a demonstrator. We've put sports entertainment as one of our themes up there. Obviously, there's been some talk around the excitement around Formula One. It obviously seems it's a very, in industrial terms, very UK focused. But this is a piece by Rewind. Sol Rogers somewhere in the house. I'm sure he put his hand up. So this is imagining what a home sports entertainment might look like with a kind of desktop augmented reality experience done with Microsoft HoloLens. And we're also talking about new forms of content in immersion. This is Factory 42's Hold the World with David Attenborough. So volumetrically captured national treasure. It's a really marvellous piece of work. It's very complete, and again shows a level of maturity in where we are with the state of the art. But this state of the art is now, this is our jumping off point. Without offending John, this is now what we want to do is what's next. I think our definition of immersion is really interesting. So when it comes to moving image, in some ways, how you extend moving image, it could be into VR experiences with machine learning characters. That's a particularly interesting kind of field. But at the moment, probably one of the most immersive experiences around screen is, and this is a very old picture, is a kind of secret cinema. So you're enhancing and making the experience for the audience more immersive, not through the deployment of technology, but through the deployment of actors. And we've probably, a lot of the people in this room have seen the walk-through game-based narrative experiences of The Void, their recent, their Star Wars thing, which I'm not paid to say, but is closing in a couple of months at Westfield. Is a really interesting piece of work, particularly for anybody who takes their children, because you're projection mapped as a stormtrooper as soon as you put your helmet on, and if you go with your kids, they're little tiny stormtroopers, which is probably the nicest thing in the whole thing. And we're also interested in experiences that don't really exist yet at the moment. So this is a demo done by Alex McDowell, production designer, Minority Report, head of the World Building Institute at USC in Los Angeles, who's helping us with the program. So this was Leviathan, the 50-foot whale that he flew through the crowd at CES a couple of years ago, well worth looking at online. Oh, and this is one last piece, I think, a particularly interesting, the Magritte archive worked with BDH, John Durrant down in Bristol, to create a VR headset-based experience, but when they got to it, they realized that what they really needed to do was to build a theatrical experience that you could experience it in the form of this very, very large hat. So we've got a very expansive view of what we mean by immersive experiences. So a quick overview of the Demonstrator program before I hand over to Tom. So we've got up to 16 million quid. So we could fund 4 projects out of that. And Tom will explain the maths behind that. And we've identified 4 areas with industry as a maximum opportunity: performance, moving image, sports entertainment, and visitor experience. So we've been, along with the KTN organised events, we've been doing some collaboration events, just briefing on each of these, and we're doing one on moving image this afternoon at the BFI, and tomorrow in Birmingham at Edgbaston Cricket Ground around sports entertainment. And the objective is in each of these areas to look for projects that can significantly advance the creative, technological and commercial state of the art and lead to learning across the whole sector, each of those sectors. This is getting very frustrating. Right, so what are we trying to do? We're trying to encourage innovation. We want new experiences that could significantly enhance the current state of the art. We want insight. So one of the requirements of the program is that you reach an audience of 100,000. Now, in my experience, the world seems to divide into 2 groups at that point: the ones who think that's frighteningly impossible, and the ones who go, yeah, no problem, which is interesting. And we want each of the consortia doing this to build capacity and knowledge share across the sector. So a part of any proposition here is the plan on how you actually do that. So these are the things we mean by being a demonstrator. So, as I said, advancing the state of the art creatively, in terms of the audience proposition, in terms of the commercial proposition, the technical implementation, reaching the 100,000 users. So you're going to have to test this on audiences, and it has to be at scale, and it has to be, relatively complete experiences, I would imagine. But that could be 1 or more experiences, 1 or more tests, 1 or more propositions. And gathering data, audience data and commercial insight from that. Now, the other requirement is we've asked people, we said you need to work with globally recognised IP. And now this, Tom can unpack that a little. But why are we asking that? We're asking it so you don't spend all of the funding on audience acquisition. So global IP that has recognition or channels to an audience cuts through there. But also, if we're going to really advance the state of the art, we have to be talking about addressing rights and IP issues within the stuff that we're funding to inform the commercial models. So, ambition and scale. So this was the head of the Stanford VR lab recently we were talking to, said each one of these demonstrators will be the biggest creative VR project in the world. So we're quite well aware that this is working beyond the scale at which people are working at the moment, and that's very deliberate. It's very right, it's very interesting observation, slightly scary, but I'd just make some comments on that. It is very ambitious, but it is not a VR project. This is not a VR competition. As I said before, if one of these projects doesn't significantly make the case for mixed reality or augmented reality at scale, we will have failed. So we're looking for game changers. We are not looking for the next thing, but bigger. And we are definitely not looking for the same thing, but a lot bigger. We're looking for things that significantly move things forward. We recognise that the scale of the funding is beyond the scale at which many people are currently operating, and we expect you to address that in your thinking, in project scope, in the production, in the talent you use, the scale of the experience. But as a consequence, we will be looking to see if you can't actually spend this much money. So if we suddenly see one of the things would be very large rights payments. This is an R&D, collaborative R&D program. If your rights owners aren't interested enough in this project that they want you to pay for their rights out of it, then they're not interested enough in the value that it's going to deliver. So we expect you that you will need consortia, wide-ranging consortia, right the way from R&D through to distribution. And we'd expect to see, as I said, that you engage that whole value chain in your projects, and many of you will be doing that already. But there are gaps in these different theme areas that we've talked about where different communities don't know each other. So we're there to help to try and plug those gaps. Right. And these are, we think, the challenges. This is risky. One of these projects at least will blow up, and that's what we've been telling them. That's, we don't expect to get the impacts that we want without some level of risk. So we think scale is a challenge, risk is a challenge, how you deal with IP, match funding, as Tom will explain, is a challenge. But on the other hand, we think the ambition is also a challenge. Will people be ambitious enough? Can they design this kind of project? Can they structure the kind of consortium? Can they do the budgeting? And you'll notice I've got scale there as a challenge again, because that's really, we do think that's one of the things that is going to be most demanding about this. And the other thing, which isn't so much a challenge for you as a challenge for us, is public visibility. So there's a desire across the industrial strategy to engage with the public. With battery technology, that's quite hard. With drug delivery in pharma, that's probably quite hard. With quantum, it's really, really hard. So of all the projects across the entire industrial strategy, it seems we will be getting more than our money's worth in terms of attention, because there's an expectation here, since we're building public-facing experiences, we will be the lead in trying to engage with the public. But that's a great thing. That's a really good thing, because to be honest, if we can't engage the public in the kinds of things that we're trying to fund through this demonstrator program, we should all go home. So that's it. Big challenge, big, risky, audacious. We think matched with a very significant budget. And now, Tom, come tell them how to do it.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? Yeah, nice comfortable seat so I can go on for as long as I want, because, at least you'll be in comfort. So thank you, Andrew, for the introduction and for the context setting. And I think that's really important, because when we're writing up the scope and we put the scope up on the website, we have to abide by gov.uk rules, and we can't write as much as we actually do want to write. So actually, providing the context helps you understand where we're coming from and helps you understand where the scope comes from and what we're really asking for. Hopefully after these slides, you'll understand a little bit more about the scope and what we mean by the scope, and you'll be in a better position to put your application together. You shouldn't have to take too many photos, because most of the text that's on the slides is actually on the website. And luckily for you, it's been on the website for 2 weeks now, and it's only just opened today. So we're giving you far more time than we normally do running this competition. So my name's Tom, I'm from Innovate UK, and I run quite a lot of these competitions in the creative industries. So first of all, I'll start with a summary. There is repetition with my slides and with Andrew's, but that's how you learn, by repetition. So hopefully, there'll be less questions at the end. So as you know, Innovate UK, as part of UK Research Innovation, is investing £6 million in 4 large-scale creative industries demonstrators through the Challenge Fund, and this is part of the Audits of the Future. So for those of you, actually put your hands up, who here is familiar with Innovate UK? That's pretty good. I don't have to do the slides anymore. So anyway, for people who may not be that familiar with Innovate UK, we are the part of UKRI where we fund business innovation. So innovation very on the commercial side, and we are reviewed by the economic return. And I think our current economic return is, for every £1 that we've invested into business innovation, we get over £7 back in GVA. So that's a kind of level that we want to work at. So this maybe not work for you, but this is all about business. When we're funding things, in these demonstrator programs, we're not just funding things that are nice to have. We're funding things that will fundamentally disrupt the industry and create great economic returns. That's what we're actually, as a team, with our objectives, and Andrew put some of them up there. He didn't put all of them up there. Some of them are really tough that we're wanting to hit. And I think if we do hit them, and I think we can hit them, it means that there'll be far more opportunities like this for the creative industries coming down the line. But we are very economically focused around this competition. Not that this competitions are going to be fun, it's not that this stuff isn't going to be great, but the fact that you've got to be grounded that this is all about economic return. That's why it's linked to the industrial strategy. So demonstrators, what is a demonstrator? Andrew has pointed out what a demonstrator is. And we have through Innovate UK and UKRI, we have a lot of competitions. They all have different names. And I think, because I work there, that they're quite Ronsil. They are quite what they do what they say on the tin. So we have feasibility studies. That's to test the feasibility of a certain technology before we do R&D. There's collaborative R&D, and that means you have to collaborate to do some R&D project. And with demonstrators, even though it's classified as industrial research, which you guys don't need to be that interested in, what a demonstrator does, especially once at this scale is, demonstrators have to demonstrate something that hasn't been, innovation that has never happened before. So, just so you know, and if you've got some ideas, it can't be just something that's happened before that's just bigger. It can't be just a natural iteration of something that's gone before, and it can't be something that's happened abroad and now we're bringing it to the UK. So it's got to be significantly different. There's got to be a level of innovation to demonstrate and to lift the whole of the sector. And another thing, when it comes to the R&D projects that we fund, most of the benefit is felt with the companies that are doing that work. With a demonstrator, they lift the whole of the sector, so there's more of a halo effect to the benefit of the money that is invested into these companies. And a good example of this, this clicker isn't working. Oh, here we are. Just so you know, don't click it now because I'm talking, but if you search the Internet of Things Cities Demonstrator, which is branded as City Verve, they've got a lovely website, which is, they've been communicating and disseminating the work that they've been doing there. That really shows you an example of what a demonstrator should be. I mean, it's in Manchester, but it's not about Manchester. There are companies involved, but it's not about those companies. It's about what a connected smart city can look like. So please look at that, check that at your leisure. So recipe for success. So, everything has a recipe, and there's several things that we want you to do, and you need all three. So just make that very clear. So you've got to be in scope for the competition. I'm covering the scope. I and the team will also be doing the scope checking for this competition. And just bear in mind when I go through the scope, if you're not in scope, you do run the risk that you don't even get to assessment. So that there are some benefits of being assessed, which the competition team will go through, but you do run the risk that you may just be rejected at that first line if you're not in scope. So I'm covering the scope today, so hopefully you'll be okay. Eligibility, you've got to be eligible for funding. My friends in the competition team who are doing a presentation after this one and the Q&A will go through all of that. So you've got to be eligible for funding. And a lot of the time, if people have hit that, and they often chat to me about the scope, they're really excited. But then the third thing is, you've got to write, and because there's an interview, present a game-changing application in a highly competitive process. So it's not good enough, just to say that, technically, am I in scope? That's not good enough. You have to have all three of these things, and they're quite tough to do. So let's just ensure that if you are going to put an application together, that you are in scope. There may be some people where this isn't, it's a bit of a struggle and they're not in scope. Do not worry. There are other funding opportunities coming down the line that Andrew has outlined. So, please don't push yourself into a certain criteria if you can't easily match it. So, let's start with the scope. So your project must, let's get this. Let's highlight the important things. So your project must demonstrate it can significantly advance the current state of the art in its chosen field. Now, I've circled must, so this basically, you've got to do this. It's a binary, it's like yes or no. So this isn't an option. You must demonstrate it significantly advances the current state of the art in its chosen field. Andrew has shown you some demonstration, showed you some examples of where the state of the art is. So it's key for you to know where the state of the art is, so you know where you're advancing it. And just to remind you that we want you to advance it. It must reach demanding audience targets, deal with current and future rights issues, and avoid excessive audience acquisition costs. To do this, your proposal must include access to or use of globally recognized IP or partnerships with rights holders or cultural brands. That's in the big red box because that's really important. That's a natural filter. That's going to be hard for quite a lot of people to put together. It may be easier for some. So if you're in a position where actually you don't have that access, then this may not be the competition for you. It's fine. There are other funding opportunities coming down the line from this pot and also from our generic pot from Innovate UK and other bits of UKRI. But that is the big scope criteria that we want you to hit, and just to make sure that that you do hit it. Click. Your demonstrator must also. There's another must, and here's a nice long list of things that we want you to achieve. Highlighted it again. We want you to demonstrate new immersive experiences at large scale, achieving a public audience across a project of more than 100,000. as it's been highlighted to you, that doesn't mean at the end of the project you've got to do a test with 100,000 people. It could be across, the whole of the project life cycle. And in fact, I would find it very hard if you were doing this if you're trying to work out what an audience experience would be, if you didn't do some iterations of user testing. We want you to demonstrate a high level of ambition, innovation scale with a goal of transforming the sector. A little bit repeating what we've said before, but that's the goal, is to transform the sector. And to do something that actually advances the state of the art, we do want a high level of ambition. We want you to bring creativity, technology, and human-centered design and data analysis in order to innovate creatively and technologically. Quite frankly, if you're working in this area and you're looking into innovating in content, you're going to have these groups. This should be natural. We shouldn't even have to have this in the scope, but this is just to steer you. This is what you need to have going forward. You need to generate audience, consumer, and user insights that can be used to test the viability of new revenue streams. That's why you need 100,000 people across the project. And you need to demonstrate scalability and the potential to be exploited and replicated across the creative, cultural, live events and entertainment industries. Again, that's one of the big pushes about having demonstrators. Now, if you're familiar with some of our competition, sometimes when you go down the list of scopes, we go slightly more and more in detail, and it kind of looks like we're actually penning you in. In this scope, we're being quite broad because we don't know we don't know what pushing the state of the art, we don't know what innovation will look like, we don't know what immersive content would look like in 10, 20 years down the line. So we've been quite broad, and we're giving you a lot of space to innovate in. And in fact, lots of these scope criteria are natural bedfellows. So the fact is, to do the user insights, you're going to need 100,000 people. And also, to do that insights, you're going to have to work with creative, technological and also human-centered designers. So it's all interlinked. There's nothing there that should really stick out for you, as in, I can hit all these, but not that one. So they're quite incestuous scope criteria. So we have some definitions, and again, these are very broad. So for immersive experiences, we're saying that these are multi-sensory, narrative or interactive audience experiences mediated through technologies, including, so not just restricted to, virtual mixed and augmented reality. As Andrew pointed out, he's very keen to have some innovations in areas apart from VR, haptics, advanced visualizations, and other sensory interfaces. These are actually quite aligned to the definitions of immersive technologies that we have for Immersive UK. So that's, I think I'm going to repeat myself, but I'm going to keep on saying broad. So, that is our definition. That's what you've got to hit. And actually, that's quite a broad target. And this is where we see the innovation happening. Another definition is the creative industries. These are the 9 sectors which are from DCMS. You all should be familiar with those, so I'm going to jump through those. But when we mention the creative industries, that's the sector we're talking about. This money is for the creative industries, and it's for these sectors. So that's the scope, and as part of this program, we've identified 4 themes, which we think we're going to have the most significant disruption, creative and commercial opportunities to grow new audiences. So we think to hit our objectives, to get that great return on investment, we think these are the 4 best themes. Now I'm going to list them through here, and I just want to say that these aren't straitjackets, these are just to guide you of where things are. Now I think a lot of these, I would be shocked if any of the applications coming in didn't actually fit in 2 or more of these areas. So don't think if you're working in one area and you've got one element that's in another area that actually works against you, that works for you. Unfortunately, when you fill the form in, you've got to actually have to write down which one you're applying for, but that's your judgment. And I'm going to whiz through them. There are some images and some examples here. I don't want to lead the witness, so don't just think just because I put some images up here, that's what you want. I don't want a Renton experience when I'm going forward for moving image. So what do we mean by moving image? We mean repeatable audiovisual audience experiences currently created for display on screens, including TV, films, games, animations, and online media. That can be a narrative, interactive, or game-based. Experiences be fictional or factual in nature and include adaptations from sources outside of other media. And if you're familiar with TV and film, you know that some of the most successful properties have come from adaptations of another source and material. I think the key bit of text here is repeatable. So this isn't about gimmicks. This isn't about something that's just adding on to a film or a TV show. This is something that's actually going to have its own 2 legs, that actually can generate its own revenue. And we're particularly looking for immersive experiences that use moving image expertise to create new audience propositions with mass market and commercial potential. We know how large the market is for film and TV, especially the content that's created by the UK. So that we want a similar thing for moving image in immersive. So the next theme is sports entertainment. I'm assuming these guys are watching football because they're holding footballs while they're celebrating it. So these are basically experiences and formats that provide remote access to sporting events across a range of platforms and generate significant revenues from this remote audience, in addition to spectators attending the events. So this is, as we've seen with sports, the amount of revenue that comes from broadcast rights is huge, and actually, it dwarfs the income that you get from being at the event. So what we're looking here is for new immersive experiences for the remote audience, so people who are probably experiencing this via broadcast, but actually pulls them closer to the actual event and makes them feel that they are there. So what are the additional things? And again, this is a very commercial area, so we will be particularly encouraging proposals that apply immersive technologies for new audience propositions in sports where remote audiences are or could be significant drivers of value, so where the most amount of commercial revenue is generated, and where events right propositions and creative opportunities could afford significant opportunities to engage with the public. So maybe open up a sport to a whole new audience that hasn't experienced it before, because to better understand it, to better appreciate that sport, immersive can actually help people along that route. Clicker. Visitor experience, nice Stonehenge here. So audience propositions that create, design, interpret or present cultural or entertainment experiences within a physical location, including collections and object-based institutions such as museums, galleries, cultural and heritage locations, location-based entertainment experiences such as theme parks or tours, or experiences that combine these elements. As you can tell, I'm reading from the screen here. So this is all the information that's actually on the web here. So this theme is all about location-based, and actually, what is that experience? What is that other layer that you can add to, a current location-based experience and entertainment area? So in this area, we're particularly encouraging ambitious proposals and partnerships that reach across the sector. And I think when it comes to visitor experience, anything that is location-based, it will struggle to scale compared to some of the other themes. So we are looking at something, so it doesn't matter what area it's demonstrating in, so whichever area it picks, we want you to demonstrate that it could scale into other areas that may be not natural bedfellows for that one sector, for example. So that's something that we're really, really interested in. And performance. So basically performance is creative works and entertainment experiences with the performing arts as their core, where the experience is co-created with the audience. This includes, but is not limited to, theatre, music, dance, and various forms or combinations. So this is really interesting. So, where performance is actually co-created with an audience, and suddenly you're using a new layer of technology, how can we ensure that the performance is still there, that the audience still feels connected? Where can we push it? How can we increase that audience? So it could be in the venue or outside the venue. And for this theme, we are particularly encouraging proposals that explore the application of immersive technology to the production or the consumption of the performance work. So it could be that actually you're using the immersive technology to create this content and the performance, or it could just be for the consumption or a mixture of those two. And we want them to, again, we want this to be relevant across multiple disciplines and a wide range of contexts, that including but not limited to conventional venues, festivals, and site-specific works. So again, we're looking for scalability. We just don't want it to ensure that it works in one context. We want it to be able to easily transfer and work in multiple venues and sites. So that's something that you need to have in the front of your mind when you're putting your application together. Again, as I'm saying about demonstrators, it's all about lifting the rest of the sector and looking beyond the area that you're demonstrating in. So other themes. This is an emerging area. So we've listed these 4 themes, but we are open and we will consider applications that are not confined to these 4 themes. But you must ensure that you are in line with the rest of the scope and to be clear, that means it has to be in the creative industries and it's got to be an audience proposition. So there's something that we think is interesting, there's innovation there, there's a real audience proposition here, but it doesn't neatly sit in the audience and funding of non-UK partners or subcontractors. So, when it comes to funding from UKRI, we like people to be partners, we like people to have skin in the game. So we don't want a vast amount of money going to subcontractors or outside or to non-UK partners that may be subcontracting clicker work that exclusively focus on new generic technologies such as e-commerce, streaming, or social media. I think they have an element to play in many of these demonstrators, but the focus that should just be an element of the application. It shouldn't be the core and the focus of it. And basically anything where it's technologies or experiences that are not primarily intended for consumer audiences, such as industrial business-to-business solutions. I think it's quite clear in the scope, but just to highlight this is for the creative industries. This is about consumer audiences. Those are the experiences we're talking about. If you're doing something that's in enterprise or B2B, there are other funding opportunities available through our organisation. So project size, you can claim up to £4 million in grant. That is the maximum grant. I'm going to go over some other bits of eligibility, but that number isn't going to increase. We're not going to be handing out grant sizes more than 4 million. We expect your project cost to be between 5 and 10 million, unless there's greater levels of business contribution. So that may be some business partners who are contributing but aren't pulling grants, and there's various reasons for that. The projects must start by November the 1st this year and end by December 31st, 2020. And as Andrew pointed out, that's because the money just disappears. And this is the way that spend profiles in government work. After that time, there will be no money. So if you do overrun, there'll be a lack of flexibility for us to actually pay your grants. Basically, if your project costs or duration fall out of our eligibility criteria, please contact us at least 10 days before the competition closes. I would say just contact us straight away. And let's go back. So just thought I'd highlight the £4 million mark here. And when we say if they fall outside, it would be, I've got a project, where I'm claiming, 4 million or under, and actually, I think I'm going to be under 5 million because I can achieve something that's ambitious for 3 million. That's the sort of conversation we want. Or I'm going to do something that's over 10 million. Please have those conversations with us. This flexibility isn't for you to say, I've got something and I want to grant a 5 million because that will be a no. Or I've got a project that's going to end in 2022 because that will be a no. But any sort of flexibility like that, please have that conversation with us because that does impact on our spend profile. And just the earlier you can contact us, the easier it is for us to deal with your application. Eligibility, so if you're a lead organisation, these are quite standard for Innovate UK. You've got to be a UK registered business. This is all about business-led innovation. You must carry out your project work in the UK and exploit the results in the UK. And you've got to work in collaboration with others. And those others could be businesses, the research base, or third sector. Your collaborations must include at least one SME. That's a state aid rule, and that's what we're going to go with. And if you're the lead, you can lead on one application and then partner in a further 2, and that's your limit to how many applications you can put through. But if you're not leading, there is no limit to the amount of applications you may be part of, because we understand there are key enabling technologies or enabling creatives who many applications can benefit from their partnering, so we're not limiting those guys. So if you're a collaborator, collaborative partners can be businesses, universities, non-profit, technology organisations, independent research organisations, cultural institutes. You guys cannot lead on the application, but you can collaborate in any number of applications. So same with businesses that aren't leading. There is no limit to the amount of applications you can be part of in collaboration. And funding. So just repeating what we said before, funding is available for projects that cost £5 million and over. And the total cost is a combination of the grant that we give you and the applicant's contribution. The maximum grant you claim is 4 million. So we're just repeating what we said before. And I just thought I'd highlight the difference between total cost and grant. I know it seems quite simple, but I've had some I've had some grant writers that have questioned the difference between total cost and grant. So just to highlight that, whenever you read the scope documents or any future scope documents, they are two different figures. Total cost is always the grant plus the contribution from the partners. Demonstrators are classified as industrial research, which means you can be funded at these match funding levels. So if you're a small or micro business, that's 70%. So we will fund 70% of the project costs. If you're medium sized, it's 60%. And if you're a larger organisation, that is 50%. So as you can see, the smaller the organisation, the greater the contribution that we will actually provide for you. And if you're a research organisation, we 100% fund you. If you're a university, you're 100% funded, but that's 80% of full economic costs. Please ask someone else what that means. I don't understand. I think it's just 100% funding. If you're a research organisation, you can claim 100% of the project costs, but you must be non-profit distributing and you must disseminate the project results. If you're a public sector organisation or charity, again, 100% of costs, but you must be performing research activity and disseminating project work. And you must ensure that whatever your costs are, don't include work that's already been funded by other public sector bodies. Ensure that you're not double dipping. During this whole process, we will be doing some, checking to ensure that everything's aligned, and that probably will be after the application process, or assessment process. Another thing to say, because it sounds quite good that research organisations are 100% funded, but they are limited. So 100% funding, that's good, but you are limited to 30% of the total project costs. Yeah, so you can only get 100% of 30%. You can't go any larger than that. If there are two research organisations working together, you have to share that 30%. So here's the cake. So that's that. As you can see, the majority of the total costs are with the business, and then you have the research organisations there. So if there's one research organisation, in theory, they can take 30% of the total project costs. If there are two, then you have to get a knife and you have to cut that slice of cake into two. It's not 30% for each one. Just bear that in mind, because I think there's a lot of interest through cultural institutes and research organisations in this competition. So here's a worked example. If don't get your calculators out, I did this on a Friday, hopefully it'll work. So a £6 million project with one large, one medium, one small business and one cultural institute. So this is how they're split. So the large is doing 40% of the work. The cultural institute, which is classified as a research organisation, is doing 20. The small is doing 10. And the medium is doing 30. Click, click, click. And they've got total costs of £6 million. So the large organisation is match funded at 50%. So their match is 1.2 and their grant is 1.2. The Cultural Institute, which is like a research organisation, is 100% funding, so they're getting 1.2 grants. So just notice that the fact that the Cultural Institute and the large organisation are actually getting the same size grant, despite the fact that they have completely different total costs. The small is getting 70% grant, so the coloured bit is their match, and the medium organisation is getting 60% grant. So that's a split. Altogether, that's a total grant of 3.9. That's how I've done it. Come back to me if I've done my calculations incorrectly. But really, you should start from what the problem that you're trying to solve is, and then work out how you're going to solve it, instead of trying to work out how you can actually get to close to £4 million as possible. That's how I spent my Friday morning. Okay, so hopefully that'll make it quite clear. And also, all the money comes separately to each organisation. It doesn't go to the lead and they hand the money out. So whatever your size of organisation, the match funding is coordinated to your size, not to the size of just the lead organisation. So the application process is two-stage. There's a written application followed by an interview. The competition teams will be doing these dates again. It opens today, but the scope's been out for 2 weeks now. The submission deadline is the 1st of August at noon, so that is 12 noon. Please don't be any later than that because it will be rejected. 18th and 19th are the dates that we have highlighted for the interviews, and people who are successful will be notified on the 21st of September. So for people who have been funded through Innovate UK before are familiar with some of the monitoring that we do, just to highlight that actually for this, for Audience of the Future and for a lot of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund money, there will be an enhanced level of monitoring, and basically with Innovate UK and with the Digital Catapult, we'll be providing more support. This is not something for you to worry about in this application process. It's just something for you to be aware of. We're working out how we're going to do it, but it's just to ensure that it should be easier for you to run your project. It should be easy for you to hit the goals. If there are any issues, we're going to be extremely proactive. We're only going to have about 4 or 5 of these projects, so we'll be providing far more support than we have in the past. This isn't fund and forget. And good luck. That's what you need to know. No, interesting. Please don't be a stranger. If you have any ideas about possible applications, please speak to me or the rest of the team about what they are. We don't want you to be working in a black box. If you have any general questions or any doubt, please contact our customer support services team. If any of you are familiar with UK utilities, normally this means I'm fobbing you off by saying speak to customer services, but these guys are absolutely great. They will get back to you as quickly as possible. I think they have to get back to you within 2 days. So please, I don't want anybody working on applications who haven't spoken to us or haven't tested something. So please just have those conversations, especially about certain complicated things like finances and eligibility, so just to ensure that when you're putting your bid in, you're really reassured that you are in scope and you are eligible. So it's all about the assessment. And that's it. I think we're doing a Q&A now. So you have any questions? No questions, because it's perfect. Yeah. Can you just say who you are before you ask your question?
Hi, I'm Dave Runyard. I run a small VR and AR studio in London. My question is, the audience of 100,000, does that need to be UK 100,000 or can it be a global 100,000?
That is an amazing question. So, because it doesn't have to be UK. In fact, it would be, we wouldn't be that ambitious if we just said it had to be UK. So no, I mean, we are limited to, when we're doing our work, we want the value to be captured in the UK, but very much, we'll be very open. And I think it'll be a very strong application that looks at international audiences as well as UK audiences.
Hi, my name is Adam Kulik. I've had a film company and now I've got an AR company. And we license IP and create AR experiences out of that. My question for you is, should the IP owner be a co-applicant?
Now this is down to, so you asked me, should they? I mean, it's not a scope criteria, but it would help in the application process. If you think how the assessor would think, so the assessor is looking at this, and he or she have 2 applications. One where the IP owner, rights holder, is a partner and they claim the grant, and you can see the activities they're doing, and one where it's just an agreement. One, it's down to judgment, but one would look stronger than the other. There are lots of different criteria and lots of different variables, but I think it was something that I would recommend people going down that route to explore.
Hi, I'm Jessica Simons from the University of Manchester. I'm just trying to make sense of the global UK audience issue. So you say you want the audience, it's got to be an experience that happens via the UK in some way. So if you created an experience that you wanted to take abroad, how would that work?
I mean, we want it to be, it's all about the value, the R&D activity being in the UK, the value being captured in the UK, but we're open, and we're really happy for it to be international. I mean, this may be a question that we have to take offline about how you do it, how you demonstrate something overseas, but it's something that would be in scope, as long as you could justify, the R&D activity in the UK and the value being captured in the UK.
because there would then be a cost associated with the travel. So if they were sort of significant, then you might see that as an issue because some of the costs are being captured or spent on travel.
My colleagues from the competition team love talking about costs, and travel is one of the costs that does get covered by our grants. So there's something for you to quiz them about.
Just want to know if the match funding had to be in cash, all of it.
It's basically the way that, it's another finance question that, I'll cover it, and if I say anything wrong, the competition team will tell me. But basically the way that Innovate works is we pay you quarterly in arrears, but it has to be money that you have spent. So capital expenditure, personnel costs, travel and subsistence. You can't match it with in-kind contributions such as, I'm working in an incubator and I got free rent and I'm going to match it with that. It's got to be actual expenditure.
Hi, my name's Stephen Partridge. I run Space Rocket Media Limited, filming live music performances, and I've got a question about the nature of partners and not using international partners. I'm assuming that means that you can't have money drawn down for international partners. So I'm thinking of distributing content, reaching audiences of well over 100,000 is straightforward. If I can continue to use YouTube and Facebook, I'm assuming I can continue to do that as long as I'm not drawing down funding for those types of partners.
No, that's correct. In fact, we're looking at ambitious projects. We're looking at projects at around £10 million. The only way that with the match funding that it's going to get to that kind of level if we have non-grant claiming partners. We welcome international partners. We're trying to restrict, no money will be going to them, and they have they have to have their place. So if you had an international partner, you'd have to justify why is this happening outside the UK. And there are loads of in this competition there are loads of examples because we need them because maybe that's the country that we're targeting. Maybe they look after a platform that is key for the project. So we do welcome them, but they won't be pulling any grants. So any of this money cannot be issued to non-UK companies or research organisations.
Am I on? Mike Gogan from the Virtual Experience Company. We work primarily in developing 3D and VR experiences in the cultural heritage sector. Can I just clarify something about the matched funding aspect? So if I were to submit a project with a value of, say, 5 million, of which our company was to develop 2 million of that, and a research establishment was to do the 3 million,
yep.
We as a company would receive 70% of the 2 million, so we would actually need to invest £600,000 ourselves to make this. Forgive me if that's a really stupid
question. That's okay, no, I'm getting my calculator out. But if you're a small organisation, then you will, we will give you 70% of those costs. You will have to incur 30% of those, but they would be personnel costs, capital expenditure. So, a lot of those costs would be ones that an organisation would be absorbing anyway, but obviously not focused on the project that you're working on at the moment of time, if you see what I mean. So yes, you would have to find that money, you would have to find somewhere, that 30%. But it can come from your own revenues, it can come from, you look at private investment, it could come from another commercial partner that you're working on this project with.
Hi, Adam Kulik from Visionizer again. Who judges, who is on the panel and decides on sort of the viability of projects, please?
This is an amazing segue into the next presentation where they actually go into the whole assessment process and why it's worked so well. Is this the last one? Okay.
Hi, I'm John Cassie from Factory 42. It's possibly a stupid question, but just following up on the audiences and the 100,000.
is that, in terms of how you measure one of those engagements, does it have to be something that a person physically goes and does something, or can they experience it interactively or digitally, like download something at home? So it could be Southampton or Shanghai, or do they have to go to a place?
No, I mean, I think there are certain of the themes where it's location-based, so I think that's where some of the challenges are. But it has to be any interaction that you have with an audience where you're actually recording, you've recorded their behaviour, you've got some data on them. So it's not, getting coach loads of people down to wherever your location is. So it can be anywhere over internationally as well.
Hi, I'm Helen from the AotF. I think I was responding to overseas partner. Can overseas partner make up the 30% that, no, like in my case, it would be 30% that is needed somewhere else. Can they do the 30%, or do they provide additional to the, let's say the budget is 4 million, and on my side, like here, this budget here is 70%.
Yeah.
Then the other 30%, can it be from overseas partners, but they're not supposed to be benefiting for that, but they contribute.
Yeah, it can. That finance can come from wherever you want that finance to come from. So it's not restricted. We're not saying it has to be UK partner organisations or UK private funding. So it can come overseas if you're getting investment to do that match funding.
And one last question is that you said it has to be a project that is very IP led, and so can it be like new type of work, but where I'm exploring a new concept sort of stuff, and it sort of involve immersive technology, and then it will after the 3 years period, what happens is that this will be expanded further still.
I mean, it's going to be IP-led. So, I mean, when we talk about IP, it's going to be creative IP that already has an audience. That way you get another 100K, but you can, at the end of the project, it could be spun out. You could be creating your own original IP. There's foreground and there's background IP. There's technological IP. What we're focused on, that is a requirement, is the fact that you have rights for some creative content IP. But at the end of the day, all the IP that's generated and all the knowledge that's generated, that's for your consortium to sort out how that gets divvied up. But there'll be lots of different valuable assets at the end of the project. Are we done? One? Okay, last one.
Thanks, Tom. Ijaz Qureshi from Nottingham Trent University. Just to follow up from the previous question about the transaction value, I'm assuming you're talking about trying to create ticket revenue with this so that we get revenue back to the UK PLC. So 100,000 audience just enjoying themselves is one thing, but actually parting with their hard-earned cash is a different thing altogether. Yeah,
that's completely different. That's what we had to say. I mean, the idea that there'll be something that actually has a value that people want to pay money for. We're in the age of the internet where you can get a large audience that doesn't pay anything for any, content value has gone down. So this is why Immersive is so interesting, because it actually could create a new market where there's better content that audiences will willing to pay the money for. As we know with music, where recorded music, that's a model where the value's gone down, but actually the live experience of going to a concert tickets have never been so expensive. So yeah, that's it. I get to go now.
Okay, so as Tom said, I'm going to be going through the competitions process. So I'm Alexis Blades, and my colleague Helen Feather will be on stage a bit later talking about the financial part of the application form. So this is actually the vitally important part, obviously being in scope and making sure you're eligible, but this is the how do you actually apply, and what are we going to ask you, and how are you going to be assessed? So we're going to look at, Eligibility criteria again, the actual process. So if you've applied through us before, you may be familiar with the Innovation Funding Service. It's an online process now. Helen will go through the finances for you and recap on the funding rules, and then also the assessment and selection. So, demonstrator eligibility. So this is a repeat of what you've heard already, but as Tom said, we learn from repetition. So you must be a UK registered business, you must carry out your project work in the UK and intend to exploit the results in or from the UK. This must be a collaborative project, and it must include at least one SME in that collaboration. So project costs between 5 million and 10 million, with the grant funding up to 4 million. As Tom said, if you fall outside this criteria, please do contact us minimum 10 days before the closing date. Project length, again, it's quite restricted, so you must start by the 1st of November this year and end by the 31st of December 2020. It's 11 marked questions, which I'll go through in a bit, and you also are allowed to update some appendices, attach some appendices for several of the questions. And if you have academic partners, they will need to upload their JES form. So types of organisation, pretty much anything you can think of for this competition. So the lead partner needs to be a UK-based business of any size. So we use the EU definitions for small, small, micro, medium and large. And research organisations, so can be universities, RTOs, public sector research establishments, research council institutes, or independent research organisations. You could also have, as in your partnership, public sector organisations and charities doing research activity. Again, a recap of the participation rules. So at least 70% of those total eligible project costs have got to be incurred by the businesses in the consortium. And that 30% for your academic or research organisation partners, so that's shared between, so if there's one, they get that 30%. If there's multiple, they have to share that 30% of the total eligible project costs. I just wanted to go through what actually is collaboration. So when we say collaboration, what we mean is there's at least 2 organisations claiming grant. It's a business-led consortium, so should involve both businesses and research organisations, and you should, in your application, provide evidence of effective collaboration. So, as we've kind of alluded to, and some of the questions you already asked, you can have non-UK businesses as your partners. Their costs will count towards the total project costs, but they won't count as collaborators. Making more than one application. So any business can lead on one application and partner on a further 2. If you're a business and you're not leading, you can be a collaborator on any number of applications. For the non-business partners, you can't lead, but you can collaborate on any number of applications. If your application's unsuccessful, you can use the feedback you receive to apply the same project in another competition. So innovation leads, consider your application to be a resubmission if it's not materially different from a previous application. So if you have applied a similar project, very similar to Innovate UK before, and it was previously deemed out of scope for that competition, that's considered a resubmission. If it was considered ineligible, so for example having project costs over the funding limit, that won't be considered a resubmission. Key dates, this competition, bit out of the box. This competition opens today, so you will have seen it online, but you won't have been able to start your application yet. Submission deadline, as Tom said, is noon on the 1st of August, so the actually won't accept any submissions after that noon deadline. So at the very latest, please start trying to submit your application in the morning, so if you do have any issues, we actually have some time to help you figure out what those are and submit successfully. Interviews 18th and 19th of September, and then we inform all the applicants by the 21st of September. I'm going to look at the actual application process now. So if you have been to the Innovate UK website, there is a link called Latest Funding Opportunities. It will take you to the Innovation Funding Service website. You can use keyword searches. Make sure, obviously, this competition has two streams, the Design Foundations and the Demonstrator, so please make sure that you're applying for the one that you want to apply for. So I took this screenshot a few days ago, so now that green button should be a bright green. Make sure so as the lead applicant, you'll see the application overview, so you've got a progress bar there. It reminds you of the deadline. You can also view and add collaborators. So as the lead, you're the one that's going to be inviting collaborators, and view and the grant terms and conditions as well. So when you're inviting any collaborators, all you need to do is enter their name and their email address, and the system will send them an email and invite them to either sign up or log in to be part of your application. So if you scroll down on that overview screen, you've got project details, you've got application questions. If you scroll down even further, there's a finances section. So those three different sections need to be completed. And you can see that the system tells you when a section is complete. So when you're answering a question, we've tried to make it as easy and intuitive as possible. So once you've invited some collaborators, you can assign questions to them to answer. There's a drop-down, so what should I include in this section? So that gives you more details about what we're looking for, what the assessors will be judging you on their scoring criteria. You can bold, you can use italic, you can use numbered and bullet pointed lists. You can't include any graphics in the actual body of the answer here. It tells you your word count, it saves as you go along, and that bottom left, mark as complete. So that's very important. If the question's not marked as complete, it won't let you submit your application. However, if you mark it as complete, you can always go back to it up until that time when you press the submit button. So what are we actually going to ask you? So in the application details section, it asks you for the title, your estimated start date, the duration, research category. So for this competition, research category should be industrial research, and you can read more about what that actually means on the Innovate UK website. And it does ask you to tell us if it is a resubmission or not. So this is what the lead applicant will be doing. Project summary. So this section's not scored, but it is sent to the assessors. So it does give them an overview of what your project is actually about. So the need or the challenge, the business need, the technological challenge or market opportunity to be addressed, the approach to be taken and how this is going to improve on the current state of the art, and the difference that your project's actually going to make to the competitiveness and productivity of the partners involved, and any wider impacts for the sector as a whole. Public description. So, to comply with government practices on openness and transparency, Innovate UK has to publish information related to funding projects. So every project, every application will need to complete this before you've submitted. Please, it is a public description, so try to avoid using jargon so that it is understandable by the public. And obviously, please be aware, as this will be publicly published, to be aware of any confidentiality issues that you might not want to mention. So we ask you how you're in scope, and as Tom said, we do a scope exercise after everyone's submitted and evaluate whether you have actually met the scope of the competition. So tips for actually completing this section is please read the competition brief in full. You've obviously attended this briefing, so that should help providing understanding of the background for the challenge and the scope of the competition. And if you're unsure as to whether or not your application is in scope, again, please just contact us, contact the customer service line, and we can have that conversation. So we've got that. I've gone through the application details, summary of the proposed project, public description of the project, and the scope question. There are 11 other questions, and we also ask you whether you're receiving funding from other public sector bodies, and we ask you to complete some finances as well. So I'm going to go through those 11 questions now. So question 1, it's just asking you about which theme you fit into. So it only allows you 2 words to answer. So you have to select moving image, performance, sports entertainment, or visitor experience. Or if you feel that you don't fit into one of those, then you can write other. So the audience opportunity in the challenge is question 2. So it's asking about the main motivations of your project, the business need, the nearest current state of the art, and is the project focused on developing an existing capability or building a new one? And what are some of the wider economic, social, and environmental challenges which are influencing and creating the opportunity for you to actually complete this project? Question 3, approach and innovation. So it's basically asking you how you're going to respond to the opportunity and challenge you identified in the previous question. For this question, you can submit an appendix. So all of the appendices, they are capped at 1 megabyte. And all of them for this competition, it will only accept PDF. Please make sure, so the appendices do go to the assessors, so please make sure they're readable at 100% magnification. Otherwise, if it's particularly difficult for an assessor to actually view your appendix, it's likely they might not give it their full attention. Question 4 is asking you about your team and resources. So the assessors are looking at whether you have the right skills and access to the right facilities in order to actually be able to carry out the project you've described. So this is a collaborative project. So also describe the current relationship between the project partners and how that's likely to change and evolve as a result of this project. In here, you should also provide details of key external parties, including subcontractors. Please explain whether your subcontractors are from the UK. If you're using foreign subcontractors, justify that here. There could be a perfectly good reason why you have overseas subcontractors. And be realistic. So highlight any gaps that you've identified in your team, any recruitments that you need to make. Please use your appendix for this question to demonstrate how your proposal includes access to or use of globally recognized IP or partnerships with right holder or cultural brand. So question 5, market awareness. So the assessors want to see that you're being realistic but being ambitious, and you've also done your homework around what is the actual size of the addressable market, what's the structure and dynamics of that market. And obviously for highly innovative projects where the market might be unexplored, explain what your route to market could be, what the size might be, and what is the evidence base for your assumptions is part of this question. Question 6. So we're asking you about the demonstrator outcomes and route to audience. So we want to hear about your plan for achieving that 100,000 audience over the project's lifetime. We want to hear about the business or commercial model the demonstrator may unlock and how you're actually going to test it, how the innovation will actually affect your productivity and growth in both the short and the long term, how you're going to protect and exploit the outputs of the project, and if there are any research organisation activity, how they're going to disseminate the outputs of that. Question 7, wider impact. Where possible, we'd like you to put in a measure for what you think are the wider impacts. So it could be economic benefits, environmental impacts, and please think about the positive and the negative. So the assessors want to see that you have that rounded view of what the wider impacts of your project are. And describe any expected social impacts as well. Again, positive and negative. So the assessors aren't looking to catch you out, they just want to know that you've done your homework, that you have a realistic but ambitious view of what your project can achieve. The project management, again, the assessors are looking to see that you've thought out your project plan, you've got work packages, what's your approach to project management, have you identified the links and dependencies between work packages and your various milestones, and for this you can upload an appendix, so a project plan or a Gantt chart, however you think will best visualize your project plan. Question 9. So what the assessors again want to see is that you are realistic about your risks. Innovative projects are risky. We expect to see risks here. And that you've done something that's more than just a superficial risk assessment. So we're not just asking you to look at technical risks, but commercial, managerial, and environmental risks as well, how you're going to mitigate against them. If you have any opportunities, they could be uncertainties as well, so how are you going to take advantage of those opportunities? Again, you can upload an appendix, so maximum 1 megabyte, 2 A4 pages, so your risk register and the text is to describe your risk processes and procedures. Additionality, so what this is actually asking you is what the difference is that this funding will make to your project. So tell us why you're not wholly able to fund the project yourself. Tell us what would happen if your application is unsuccessful. And finally, question 11. So question 11, it's entitled Costs and Value for Money. So the assessors are looking to see that your project has reasonable costs and it is good value for money. So highlight how this compares with what you would spend your money on otherwise. Justify the balance of costs and grants across the project, and justify any subcontracted costs and why they're critical to your project. So Helen is going to come up to talk to you about application finances.
Okay, morning everybody. So I'm going to go through now the funding rules and what you can and can't claim for on this competition. So I think this is just a recap again what we've said a few times. So if you're a business, you can claim a proportion of your eligible costs, and the amount that you can claim will depend on which of those categories you fit into, so whether you're small, micro, medium or large. And you will need to match fund the remainder of those costs with your own funds, wherever those may come from. So it may be from your own funding, it may be from another investor. The only thing you must note is that it can't come from any other public funding. So it must be some form of private funding to match fund the amount that we will pay. Research organisations, so universities will apply through the GES system, and that will calculate their full economic cost, and they can claim for 80% of that full economic cost. And I'll talk about academic partners in a bit more detail in a moment. Other research organisations can claim 100% of their costs. All research organisations must explain how they plan to disseminate the work that they've done on the project. And then public sector organisations and charities, again, can claim 100% of their costs. They must explain how they plan to disseminate. And they must also just check, if you are a public body, that you're not claiming for any costs which are already covered by the public purse. So as we said, if you are receiving any funding from any other public body, whether that's in the UK or outside of the UK, towards your project, then that would come off the amount of grant that you can receive from Innovate UK. So there is a question in here that asks you about any other public funding. Now, please only complete this if you're receiving grant money for this project. If you've received grant money from for previous projects or work that have led up to this or related projects, don't include that because it will take it off the amount of grant that you can claim from us. But if it is for this project, you need to declare it, and that will then adjust your grant accordingly. If you aren't sure, if you're receiving some funding and you're not sure whether that counts as public funding or not, please get in touch with us and we can clarify for you. So the first section that you'll need to complete is your project costs. So this is for any type of organisation apart from the academics in your consortium. So there's various different categories that you'll need to complete, which I'll go through. There's some detailed project cost guidance online, which you can link to from IFS. It's also available on our website. And that has a lot of detail about each of these categories. So if you haven't applied to us before, or if you need a refresher, do read that guidance carefully. That goes through exactly what you can and can't claim for under each one. So the first section is labour costs. So you can claim for any staff who are working directly on the project. They must be paid through PAYE, and you can include national insurance, pension and non-discretionary costs. You can't claim for dividends, bonuses or any time when they're not working on the project. So you'll need to complete here what their role is within the project. So you don't need to list each individual person, but for example, project manager, engineer, etc. What the annual salary is, and how many days they'll be working on the project, and that will then calculate your labour costs. There are different rules. If you are a small or micro company and you don't operate a PAYE scheme, you can still claim an amount. I think it's £22 an hour for 40 hours a week. So you can claim for that, and that needs to be audited through timesheets as well. And there's more detail on that in the project cost guidance. Next section is overheads. So there are three ways technically of calculating your overheads. You could have no overhead costs. You can select 20% of your labour costs, and that is the most straightforward way of putting in your overhead costs. Especially if you want to get up and running quickly, there's going to be less checks on that than if you calculate your overhead yourself. But if you do want to put in your overheads, you do calculate overheads, and that will then prompt you to tell us about your indirect and your direct overheads. Again, there's a lot of guidance online about these categories. So for indirect overheads, we mean any overheads relating to the administrative and support staff who are supporting the project. So that might be in HR, in finance, administrative staff. So they're not working directly on the project, but a proportion of their time is being spent on supporting it. So you can claim for their time through these overheads, and also anything that relates to them, such as utilities, equipment, etc. We also have direct overheads. So this is for the people who are working directly on the project. So any overheads relating to those people, such as office utilities, IT equipment, etc. And with overheads, you do need to show that they are being incurred as a result of the project. So they're not something that would have been incurred as part of your day-to-day activities. The next section is material costs. So for any materials that you need to purchase to use directly in the project, explain what the item is, what the quantity is, the cost per item, and that will then calculate your total materials cost. And then capital equipment. So if you are needing to purchase any equipment, or you'll be using existing equipment on this project, you can claim for the depreciation of that piece of equipment. So tell us what the item is, whether it's new or existing, how long you'll be depreciating it over, and the value at the start and the value you expect at the end of the project, how much you'll be using it, and then you can claim for that amount. We then have subcontractors. So you should have explained the role of any subcontractors within the body of your application as well, because that's what the assessors will be looking at. But you also need to list out here who you plan to use as subcontractors. So tell us who they are, the country where they're based, and a brief description of their role in the project. As we've said before, if they are overseas, then make sure you've got a strong justification for why you need to go overseas to access that resource. And then we have travel and subsistence. So you can claim for any T&S costs which relate directly to your project. So that's most likely to be travelling to meetings with your consortium partners. I know somebody asked about overseas partners. Again, that would be an eligible cost if you can justify it as part of the project as a necessary expense. So tell us what the purpose of the journey is, the description of the cost, how many times you plan to incur it and what the cost is, and that will calculate your T&S costs. And then finally, we have other costs. So that's anything else where you're going to incur costs on the project which doesn't fit into any of those previous categories. So that could be things such as training, market assessment, licensing new technologies, etc. So again, there's a bit more guidance online about the types of things that we might expect to see in that category. And if you're not sure about any costs and whether they are eligible or not, please do get in touch with our customer support desk, as they'll be able to advise you as you go through and put your costs in there. So once you've put in your project costs for your part of the project, and it's worth just saying each partner will go in and put their own costs in for their proportion of the work they're doing, you'll then need to complete some details about your organisation. So we ask you your organisation size, and that's so that we can calculate the amount of grant that you're eligible for. And then there's some financial information as well, which isn't used as part of the assessment, but that's for Innovate UK's purposes when we come to review your project if you are successful. And the next section is your funding. So this is where you'll have to input the percentage of grant that you are claiming. So it will tell you the maximum that you can claim. It may be that you're putting in a higher contribution than you are claiming grant, and you want to adjust that, in which case you need to manually adjust this percentage down. Each organisation must accept the grant terms and conditions at this point. So if you applied to us in the past, before the days of the Innovation Funding Service, we used to have a conditional offer letter, which you would receive around a month after you had been told you were successful. And we don't have that step anymore because each organisation signs up to those terms and conditions when they tick this box before the application is submitted. So it saves a bit of time further down the line if you are successful. And this is also where you need to declare any other public funding that you are receiving towards this project and make sure that the amount of grant you're claiming reflects that. If you've got any partners in your application who are not claiming grants, so maybe that they're an overseas partner, or they could be UK-based but they don't wish to take a grant for the project, you still need to invite them as a collaborator to join the project. They can then select not requesting funding. They do still need to go through and put in their project costs so that we can understand what their contribution is to the project, and that will count towards your total project costs. But that partner won't be named in the grant offer letter if you are successful. So for academic partners will need to apply through the GES system, which is owned and run by the research councils. We use that to validate academic costs and make sure that what you're claiming is eligible under all of their rules. So we follow all of the Research Council rules and guidelines when it comes to funding academic partners. You'll need to complete a GES form on the GES system, which is an entirely separate system from IFS. They don't talk to each other. So make sure you go in and do the GES form and then input the costs into IFS as well. So academic partners will need to put in their project costs. So this basically mirrors what's on the GES form. So you just need to copy over the costs from your GES form into IFS. Please double check that they do match up. Obviously, this can lead to us offering you the wrong amount of grant if you are successful. You'll also need to upload the JES document to the system showing a with council status as a PDF. So just make sure if you do have any academic partners or if you're from a university, make sure you allow enough time to get through the JES process to be able to then complete this bit before the Innovate UK deadline. And as well as the financial information in the JES form, you'll also need to provide justification of resources and pathways to impact. If you have any queries specifically about how to use the JES system, please contact the JES help desk rather than the Innovate UK customer support services, because as I said, they own and run the system. We don't actually have access to it, so they'll be the best people to help you with that. So when you come to submit your application, you can review it before you submit it. So IFS will check that all of your sections are marked as complete before you can hit submit. Please leave plenty of time to check your submission and go in and hit submit on all of those questions, because the deadline is absolute at midday. That's it, you won't be able to submit. We can't let you in after the deadline. And we do see in nearly every competition applicants who are there at 11:58 trying to go through and complete all of the questions and hit done. And then unfortunately, if it's 1 minute past 12, we can't let you in. So just really make sure you've given yourself plenty of time to just double check and that you've gone through and each question is marked as complete, so then you can submit the application. You'll see a project cost summary. This is what all of the partners will be able to see. So you'll be able to see the headline amount for each category for each of your partners. Only the partner themselves can see the detail behind that, so that is confidential to each organisation. You just see the top level figures, and this is also what the assessors will be able to see. Please double check, as we've said, you must be eligible for this competition, which means you must be within the project costs and the duration that we've stated, unless you've got in touch with us and we've discussed it and we've said it's okay for you to submit outside of those costs. So just double check that. Again, it's another really frustrating thing that we see. People spend loads of time working on an application and it comes through to us and they're outside of those rules, and unfortunately we have to reject the application in order to be fair to everybody. And it's really frustrating when you've put all of that time and effort into writing the application. So do make sure that you are within the eligible costs and the duration that we've specified. The system will check that your research participation is within that 30%, and it won't let you submit if you're outside of that. All organisations must have gone in and put in their finances and marked them as complete before you can submit, and as I said, it will check your research organisation. So once you're ready, you've marked every section as complete, you say you want to submit it, and then once you've submitted it, you can't go back and make any changes. So do make sure that you're fully happy with it before you hit that submit button, as we're also unable to make changes to your application once you've gone past that stage. So when you've submitted, you'll receive an email confirming that it's been submitted. You'll be able to see what happens next, and you can go back in to view it or print it out or print it to PDF at any time that you want to. This is just to illustrate really our point about leaving yourself plenty of time to submit before the midday deadline. I know this is quite small on the screen, but this is basically by hour leading up to the deadline. So you can see that the majority of applications, despite us saying, please make sure you leave plenty of time, they all tend to come in within the last 2 hours before the midday deadline. And there's always people who are doing it in a rush and then they realise they've copied and pasted the wrong thing into one of the questions, or they've left it blank, or they've missed something out of it that they really wanted to put in there. And as I said, we can't help you if it's after the deadline. So also, we get a lot of calls in the time leading up to the deadline. Our support desk are usually very busy helping people get through the system and sorting out any issues they might have. So just give yourself plenty of time. You'll have a dashboard in IFS that you'll be able to go in, so you'll be able to see any applications that are in progress, and if you're successful, that's also where you'll go to set up your project. Now, in terms of what happens after you've submitted your application, that will then go out for assessment by up to 5 assessors. Now, I know somebody asked about who the assessors are, so they will be people who will be selected by Tom and his team as experts in this area. They come from both industry and academic backgrounds. And we'll have people with a range of expertise, and when you put your applications in, it'll be up to Tom and his team to look at the application and work out which assessors have got the best expertise, who are going to really understand your application and assess it for you. And they do all have to sign very strict confidentiality agreements. They also have to declare any conflicts of interest, and if an assessor was involved in an application in any way, they wouldn't be allowed to assess on the competition. And when it comes to the interview panel, again, Tom will select the people who have the best expertise to assess the applications that are going to be there presenting on the day. So there'll be a range of assessors there who will be able to look at the technical, innovative side of your application and also the project management side of it as well. And in terms of what they're looking for in the written application, so clear and concise answers. So make sure that you read the guidance that's online, make sure you're answering the questions that we're asking and you're giving them as much good information as you can so that they can look and think, yep, you're answering all of the points in that question, I'm going to give this 10 out of 10. Make sure you give yourself the best opportunity by giving them the information that they need and the information we're looking for in a clear way. So don't overload it with too much detail that's might be really, really interesting, but it's not relevant to the question. You're not going to get any marks for it, so don't use up your space with irrelevant information. Also, try not to leave gaps in there, so the assessors are trying to make assumptions and make guesses about your application and what it is you're trying to do. Make sure that any claims you've got in there are quantified and justified. And they're looking to see that you've got a really good opportunity for growth. It's really innovative, really different, and it really needs that public sector investment to help to take it forward. And also that you've got the right people involved, you've got the right approach to your project, you know what you're doing, you're going to be able to, you've got a really good chance of making this a success. You'll receive assessor feedback on your application, whether you're successful or not, from that written stage. And if you are invited through to interview, then hopefully that feedback will be really useful for you in putting your presentation together and addressing any concerns that the assessors may have had at the written stage. So if you do come through to the interview panel, those are on the 18th and 19th of September. Please do keep those dates free in your diary, because if you can't make those dates, unfortunately we can't reschedule the interview panel, so we do ask you and your partners to make sure you've got those dates clear. You can bring up to 8 people with you, so we would expect to see a range of people from across your consortium. You'll have 20 minutes to present to the panel and convince them of why your idea is really good, and then there'll be a 30-minute Q&A session with the interview panel. And we will need you to provide your presentations and the names to us ahead of the interview. And if you are successful, we'll provide you with some more details nearer the time. So just a few things about what happens if you are successful in this competition. So when you come to set up your project, you can do that through the online system again. And there's 7 different steps to complete, and all grant claiming partners will need to go in and provide some information about their financial contact. We do ask you to complete that as quickly as possible, ideally within 30 days, and we expect projects to be able to start within 90 days. If you aren't able to do this, then the funding may be withdrawn. And also to note that any project change requests can't be submitted before the project starts. So make sure that your application is exactly what you intend to deliver in your project. As unfortunately, if you want to make any changes to partners or scope or anything before you started the project, we probably won't be able to accommodate that unless there's a very, very strong reason for it. It's worth mentioning the collaboration agreement. So you must have one of these before you can claim your first grant. So make sure you start talking about that with your partners early, especially as these are likely to be very big consortiums, perhaps people you haven't worked with before. So make sure you start talking about those and get that in place as early as possible so you don't hold things up down the line if you are successful. We don't need to be involved in that, but we need to see that there is one and that it's been signed by all participants in the project. Some things to note about grant claims. Grants are claimable quarterly in arrears, so you will claim for any costs that you've incurred and paid, and then you claim back for those costs. You can only claim for costs that you've incurred between the start and the end dates of the project, so don't start your project before the agreed start date or you won't be able to claim for those costs. You will be assigned a monitoring officer and they'll be your main point of contact with Innovate UK. So they'll work with you during the project, they'll monitor your project on a quarterly basis, and they will monitor that against the financial forecast and the plan that you provide us with. And they'll be the ones to sign off on your claims. And then again, that's our contact details. So if you do have any questions as you go through with your application, please do get in touch with Innovate UK's customer support service. As Tom said, they're a very helpful, very knowledgeable bunch, and if they can't help you, then they'll pass you on to either Tom or a member of my team to get you the detail that you need. So I think that brings me to any questions. I'll leave those up there. Any questions around the process or anything else you want to ask Tom, if he's still here? There's one at the front down here. Oh,
Thanks for that. Simon Navin from Ordnance Survey. We've been part of the CityVerve demonstrator. You said right at the start, sorry, it wasn't you, it was your colleague, that there would be an enhanced monitoring process for this demonstrator. It's been pretty rigorous so far in CityVerve. So what does that mean in comparison to what's happened before?
Is Tom still here? Matt can maybe help.
Matt Sampson's here, he can answer.
Hello, apologies for talking from the back. What we mean by that really is that we're currently in a review process for all of our monitoring kind of processes and practices. So we are looking at how we monitor projects generally. So that's also going to include this as an IFCS project. But more specifically, one of the things I think Andrew was keen to communicate was in terms of these particular projects, the kind of sort of monitoring and oversight of those projects will be a lot more hands-on than perhaps they have been in the past. So we're looking to kind of actively engage and support those projects across as they come through. So that's really what that means.
Hi, Alexandra from 360 Effects. The private funding, so in my case it's 70% because I'm a very small company, and there will be 30% that needs to be privately funded. Does it need to be locked and agreed at the time of application, or can it be left open for the stage when we know we are funded?
Yeah, it could be left open, so as long as you can demonstrate, I would mention where you plan to get that funding from in your application. And then you'll need to be able to prove it. If you are successful, when our project finance team comes to go through your costs, they'll obviously make sure that you can meet those match funding requirements, and they'll want to know where that's coming from. So yeah, that's fine.
Any more questions? There's one more down there.
Maybe it's for Tom at the back, but what's the difference between the lead person, a partner and a collaborator?
Well, partner and collaborator is the same thing.
So what I was a bit confused about is some slides said you can be a partner in 2 projects, but you can be a collaborator in any number of projects.
Yeah, that's probably our fault for wording it slightly unclear, but we mean the same thing. So if you're leading, you can be a partner in another 2, but if you're not leading, you can be involved in up to 3. Is that right?
It says, sorry, if you're leading, you can lead and then you can partner on another 2. If you're not leading, you can collaborate on as many as you like.
Yeah.
Which also means, interestingly, if you're an academic organisation, because you can't lead, that means that you can, in theory, collaborate on as many projects as you like. But I would say, especially if you're a kind of smaller size organisation, just be very careful and very clear about the number of projects that you're looking to collaborate on. So if you've got, let's say, an enabling technology or a kind of technology platform or some innovative tech that you're developing, how are you going to support all of those projects? So if you were successful and you were a successful collaborative partner on all 4 demonstrators, how are you going to support that? So just be aware of that, because we are obviously assessing these centrally, and we'll look at your applications, and if there's only 3 of you and you're going to say that you're supporting 4 projects, we would question your ability to deliver on those, but in theory you can apply for as many as you like.
Thanks. How important is it to have an academic institution as part of the application?
I'd say it's up to you really in what you're doing in your project, and what you think is necessary for the project, and the skills and the organisations that you need. If you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, just to back that up, it's not a requirement. It's all your judgment. I'll go to the front of the stage. Basically, it's not a marriage of convenience. Your consortium, they're all meant to be parts that all make sense together. And if there is something that's in the research base, and if we're talking about pushing the state of the art, there's very likely there's going to be something in the research base, and we want to push it to be commercialized. That completely makes sense to have academia and universities involved, but not necessarily. I'm sure we'll have some applications that have no academia involved at all.
Any more questions? There's one right at the back.
Hi, I'm Luke from the Philharmonic Orchestra. I didn't quite catch the slide just before that about the grants and the quarterly payments, and they're all paid in arrears, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a big cash flow challenge for these organisations.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Okay, well, we might, if there's no more questions, we might wrap up now. We have lunch downstairs where you had coffee and tea this morning, and we'll all be around, so please do utilise the time to nab us all individually if any more questions. And also to point out, Carrie, what my colleague and I were from Immersive UK, on our website we have a brokering platform. So if you want to find partners and you're looking for people to work with, go online, put up your profile, you can find other people, and you can connect through that online service, and Carrie and I are around to also help and support where needed. But that's a Trojan session, that's 2 hours long, with a huge amount of information. You all deserve a break, it deserves some lunch. And just to say thank you so much to Andrew and Tom and to the competitions team at Innovate UK for being here today, and thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing your applications as they come in.